The story begins with two young children named Jack and Brooke, who, despite their young age, managed to survive a world that had been infected with a zombie virus in an isolated house without their parents.
That's fine, Jack.
This was almost impossible for someone their age because the dangers they faced were great. Then one day, a couple named Donnie and Melanie arrived, driving a car. Jack, who noticed their arrival, immediately greeted the two strangers while carrying his toy pistol. However, when Donnie questioned where his parents were, Jack chose not to say anything. Because of this, Donnie simply smiled and then left after saying that he would return later.
It's gonna take me about an hour to walk back.
That night, Jack quickly locked all the doors and windows to ensure their safety from the zombies, who were always waiting for an opportunity to enter the home, and the two children spent the entire night without any incidents. Then, the next morning, Jack and Brooke did their usual activity. They ate breakfast, played outside the house, and then went back inside before dark. However, a few days later, while they were playing outside of the house, Donnie and Melanie returned, and this time they once again asked about Jack's parents. Being faced with the same question again, Jack decided to lie by saying that his parents were traveling to the city to buy supplies. Upon hearing that, Donnie and Melanie just smiled while explaining that they would look after them until their parents returned, and after realizing that the house was fully stocked with food and resources, they decided to stay there for a while. At the same time, it turned out that both of them seemed to know that Jack and Brooke were not actually living with their parents. That night, Jack accidentally overheard a conversation between Donnie and Melanie, who explained that they intended to take full control of the house. So, for their safety, Jack then took Brooke and their dog named Scott to stay in a secret room, which was a hidden sanctuary that had protected them all this time. The next morning, while eating breakfast, Donnie and Melanie began to act as if they were the true owners of the home. Melanie even said that she really liked her new family. However, Jack, who heard her words, chose to remain completely calm while saying that everything would be over before they could even realize it.
Why you keep staring at your dog?
Is she a seizure dog?
It will be over before you know it.
It turned out that what Jack said was not just a threat, because when night arrived, something was about to happen, and it seemed that Jack had calculated it, so he moved Brooke and Scott back into the secret room. Meanwhile, in another room, Donnie and Melanie were occupied with their own world and did not realize that danger would arrive shortly. At that moment, Melanie, who had just stepped out of the bathroom, was startled by the appearance of several zombies outside the window. Scared, the couple then quickly turned off the lights, thinking that the zombies would not be able to see them. However, the bedroom door suddenly swung open, and Donnie, who realized that something was coming, took out his weapon to check. However, he then discovered that Melanie was lying on the floor with her mouth bleeding, and right after that, something dragged her away. That was when he realized that it was too late for him, because a zombie suddenly attacked him. The next day, a man was seen walking through the forest and discovered several traps that had been set up by someone. Then, while following the trail of those traps, he spotted a house located in that remote area. While looking through the window, the man was suddenly startled by the appearance of Brooke, who stood right beside him. But before he could react, the stranger was hit by a tranquilizer dart fired by Jack using his modified toy gun. Jack's response showed that it was not the first time the two siblings had dealt with human intruders. When the stranger finally regained consciousness from the effects of the tranquilizer, Jack, who had been waiting for him, immediately began asking several questions. The man then revealed that his name was Dan, and that he was a Special Forces soldier who was currently on a journey to find his missing wife. Upon hearing this, Jack was surprised because the man did not seem like the other people who had previously come to this place, as he did not ask for their food or medicine, but instead, he only wanted his gear back, which had been confiscated by Jack when he was unconscious. Because of that, Jack offered a deal. He told Dan that he was willing to return all of his weapons and equipment, but in exchange, he must fix the house's electrical power generator that had broken down. In that conversation, it was revealed that Jack's father was a scientist who had vanished a long time ago, while their mother was a Homeland Security agent who had recently left to carry out a secret mission. Later, while investigating the power source of the house, Dan discovered that the electrical energy generated and collected for the home came from a device that would only turn on when someone ran on a treadmill. But then, while they were still talking, Dan was shocked when he noticed a zombie near the window, and he quickly grabbed the weight plate there before rushing outside to kill it. However, what Dan did actually made Jack mad, saying that he did not need to go that far because all the windows in the house were made of bulletproof glass, meaning the zombies wouldn't be able to get inside. Fortunately, despite being scolded by a kid, Dan did not overreact. Instead, he continued to help generate electrical energy by walking on the treadmill. The next day, Jack left the house to inspect the traps that he had set up throughout the surrounding area when he noticed that one of those traps had successfully captured a zombie. However, at that exact moment, he was forced to hide after he heard the sound of gunshots. Shortly after, 3 hunters arrived, but fortunately, they did not notice that Jack was hidden nearby, and they left the area shortly after that.
It's already dead.
Meanwhile, Dan, who was staying back at the house, seemed to get closer to Brooke, who slowly accepted his presence.
You want some, sausage?
However, Jack was different, as he still did not fully trust Dan, especially given their current situation. A short while later, Dan was in another room when he discovered a car key while examining the photos and belongings of the children's mother. Thinking he might be able to use the car, he then went to the garage to check it, but unfortunately, when he tried to turn the car on, the engine failed to start. However, he remained calm and tried to figure out a way to save time in case he needed to leave the area quickly later on. Sometime later, while spending some time outside, Dan accidentally noticed a hidden room that caught his attention, but before he could enter it, Jack suddenly appeared and told him to stay out of that room. Later, after spending the rest of the day together, the 3 of them went to rest, and because Jack felt that Dan was no longer a threat to them, he did not take Brooke with him into the secret sanctuary. However, before falling asleep, he strangely handcuffed his own wrist to the bed frame. The next morning, Dan woke up abruptly after hearing a noise, which turned out to be Jack heading outside to check on his traps. He returned to the place he had gone the day before and discovered that the zombie trapped before was still stuck there. Shortly after that, Dan arrived at the scene after following him and suspected that the zombie might actually be Jack's mother since Jack didn't kill it. Then, when he intended to kill it, Jack immediately stopped him, which made Dan annoyed, knowing there was no reason to keep the zombie alive. Dan returned to the house alone, where he decided to open the restricted room that he had been forbidden to enter earlier. Inside that room, he found a discarded blanket along with walls covered in deep scratch marks, meaning that the room had likely been used as a makeshift cell to lock up a zombie. In the middle of his confusion, Dan suddenly heard the sound of an approaching car. Realizing that danger was coming, he quickly rushed inside and locked all the doors while grabbing Brooke, who happened to be standing near the window. Fortunately, since the house was completely secure, the hunter who came with the car had no choice but to drive away, and in that exact moment, Jack was actually watching them from a distance. After that tense moment, Jack finally changed his mind and chose to trust Dan completely, knowing that he was caring enough to save Brooke. He then returned Dan's weapons when Dan decided it was time to resume his journey. A few days before his departure, Dan said that he was thinking about bringing Jack, Brooke, and Scott with him to keep them safe, saying that he could not bear to leave them behind in such a dangerous place. However, before Jack could answer him, they were startled by Brooke's scream.
Where's your sister?
And when they checked, they found out that the hunters from before had returned and taken the girl hostage. In the middle of the tension, Dan was shocked when a barrage of gunshots suddenly pierced the 3 hunters standing before them, causing them to die instantly. It turned out that the shots came from the children's mother, who had finally returned home. However, during the shootout, Dan was accidentally hit by one of the hunters, causing him to collapse and fall unconscious. A few hours later, Dan finally woke up from his fainting with his feet tied together. However, the rest of his body was completely uninjured and perfectly fine. Then, once he freed himself from the ropes, he walked inside the house and met with Jack, Brooke, and their mother. Since Dan looked confused, the mother explained that the reason why he was still alive was that he had actually been infected by the virus. She also said that Jack was actually infected by the same virus for a long time. She then explained that, when people who got infected usually lost all brain function and began to act purely on instinct to satisfy their hunger, for some reason, there was a rarer case where an infected person's brain would remain fully functional, like a normal human. However, this rare condition also granted them enhanced physical strength and the ability to heal rapidly from their wounds. The main problem was that these rare infected people never knew exactly when they might lose control and transform, and the only reason why Jack had been able to track his own transformation all this time was thanks to Scott, who had been specially trained to detect the change by sniffing Jack's body odor before the transformation occurred. That was the real reason why Jack always handcuffed his wrist to the bed frame every night, and the mysterious room that Dan opened earlier was the room where the mother locked Jack up whenever he became uncontrollable.
You see, there's 2 types of infected. Somehow you got infected, right? And then at some point you change back.
How do I know when I'll change again?
Great question. You don't.
I need some air.
Shortly after that, they suddenly received an unexpected visit from several individuals who turned out to be the mother's former colleagues. The group was led by a man named Brett, who was searching for his missing daughter, Melanie, after she had disappeared alongside a man. The reason why he visited them was that he suspected that Melanie had come to this location. However, because he could not find any proof for his suspicion, he was forced to leave, along with all of his men.
Boys?
That night, the mother explained to Dan that the area surrounding them was under the control of the National Security Agency. She also revealed that the agency had actually predicted the arrival of the zombie virus epidemic a long time ago, and because of this, they had secretly constructed thousands of identical buildings in remote areas like this one as shelters that were fully reinforced with various heavy-duty materials and equipped with independent power systems designed to allow humans to live. Upon hearing this, Dan was furious because he believed that the agency should have warned the people much earlier, which could have saved countless lives instead of focusing on building thousands of secret shelters. Later, when Dan was preparing to leave, the mother shared that Jack actually suffered from a congenital heart defect. Since birth, Jack had been predicted to live for no more than 3 years. However, her husband, who was one of the first scientists to successfully discover the zombie virus, decided not to give up and tried to find a way to save their son. He eventually decided to take a massive risk by injecting the zombie virus into Jack's body, which then transformed him into one of the rare infected with special abilities. Unfortunately, at one point, Jack lost control and bit his own father, causing him to get infected and turn into a zombie himself. The mother was then attacked, and she had no other choice but to shoot her husband to death to save herself and her children. As time went on, Dan grew much closer to Jack's family. However, one day, Scott suddenly began to bark loudly, causing the mother to realize that Jack was about to turn into his zombie state. Because of that, she was forced to lock her son in the quarantine room. Once Jack was locked inside, her heart shattered as she could only listen to the terrifying sounds of thumping and scratching coming from behind the heavy door, and for a whole day, the mother and Dan took turns guarding the door, hoping that Jack would recover quickly. The next day, the situation turned chaotic when they discovered that Brooke, who was playing outside, had suddenly collapsed on the ground. In that exact moment, the mother quickly realized that Brooke had also suffered from the exact same congenital heart condition as Jack. However, in this critical moment, they could not do much because of their limited medical supplies, and to make it worse, the nearest operational hospital was so far away from them. Seeing no other choice, Dan suggested that they should infect Brooke with the virus, just like they did with Jack. However, the mother immediately rejected the idea because she believed that Jack's survival was a rare miracle that might not happen a second time for Brooke. So, she eventually decided to let Brooke pass away peacefully without infecting her with the virus. Sometime later, after Brooke's death, Nicole and Dan discovered that Jack had finally recovered from his transformation, and once they were all gathered again, Dan decided with a heavy heart that it was time for him to continue searching for his missing wife, and although the mother and Jack begged him to stay, Dan remained determined to continue the search. During his journey, Dan kept remembering the warmth of Jack's family, which made him think about returning to them, until finally, one thing made him return for food. When he woke up the next morning, he discovered a lot of fresh footprints heading directly toward Jack's house. Feeling that something was about to happen to them, he rushed back immediately, and when he arrived, he discovered that the home had been surrounded by Brett and his armed men, who had returned to search for Melanie. Inside the house, the mother was tied up because she refused to answer Brett's questions regarding Melanie's whereabouts, as she actually did not know anything about. Meanwhile, Dan, who was watching from outside, slowly managed to infiltrate the building. As he moved through the kitchen, he discovered that Jack was hiding in a safe spot. When they met, the boy informed Dan about the number of enemies inside the house, and after finding out how many enemies he was about to face, armed with utensils found in the kitchen, Dan began to eliminate them one by one.
Don't worry. They're coming.
Like a shadow of death. Upon reaching the house's living room, Dan immediately came face to face with Brett and his remaining men. In that critical moment, left with no other options, Dan unexpectedly slashed his own neck, intending to accelerate his transformation by rapidly draining his own blood. Jack and his mother, who immediately understood Dan's intention, took the chance to escape when Brett and his men were caught off guard. Then, as soon as the lights were turned off, Dan suddenly turned into a zombie and attacked everyone. On the other hand, Jack and her mother could only hide inside the secret room while listening to Dan's terrifying roars, which quickly attracted a massive horde of zombies to get inside their house. The next morning, Dan woke up in his human state and discovered that the whole house was completely empty, with bodies scattered everywhere. Then, while searching for Jack and his mother, he found a farewell letter left behind by the mother, informing him that she and Jack had traveled toward the north. Upon discovering this news, Dan immediately picked up Jack's favorite toy, before deciding to resume his journey to follow them toward the north.